I'm Mark Hodges from ArborTech, and today we're going to be talking about roses and fruit trees, pecan trees, and disease and insect problems with those different things. First of all, we want to get started talking a little bit about our equipment. One, since it's so freezing cold out today, I'm going to put gloves on, but they're also a good protection. One of the things we use is some bypass clippers. And what you want to get on these is, why they call them a bypass, is because the blade actually goes past here and you get a good clean cut. And that's what we want to have, where we don't have stubs and making a sharp cut instead of smashing or damaging the plants that we are cutting. So if you have some in the store where the blade comes flat down onto it, those aren't the kinds you want. You want to get you some nice bypass cutters. One of the things you also want to do, so you're not spreading diseases from one plant to the other, is get some Lysol. You can grab some Lysol and just spray it on your pruning tools as you go from one plant to the other. This will stop a lot of the bacterias and other things out there that are bad for plants. You can cut into one and spread it to another. First of all, we're going to talk about some roses. And roses are unique right now, that we're kind of getting a lot more aggressive with the roses during our dormant pruning. So when we go through on our roses, we want to really open them up. We want to make sure that there's no crossing or dead. So we come through and we kind of just open this on up. So, you know, we kind of have something in here, and it's kind of, this branch is over into here and this one over here. And this is what I talked about of making a good clean cut, is coming right next to the plant. So you make your cut in there. Also, you know, any of these other plants in here, we want to make sure our buds are pointing the right direction. So here we have this bud right here, and it's kind of pointing out that way. And so we're going to make our cut just a little bit of a 45, so it's shooting out that direction. Here we kind of have a dead stump on in there, so we want to make sure we prune that out. Kind of just start thinning things out here. Make another prune right there. Kind of bringing it down and opening it on up. So if you want the rose to grow this way, we kind of have 3 buds heading this direction. Kind of prune it right there. Opening things on up. Make sure there's no crossers. Things that are rubbing against each other. Now, if you want really long roses, you can get really aggressive with the plant, and we can almost come right down in here. Now, if you want a lot of roses, we leave it kind of what we call moderate right here. So we kind of leave quite a few more buds and things on in there, but that's just a quick pruning of your roses. Another thing you can do that we'll talk a little bit about on the fruit trees is dormant oil spray. This would be a good timing now to come in and spray now with your dormant oil spray to keep the insects off and the spread of other diseases. All right, here we have where we want to make proper cuts, and why it's so important. As we look right up here, this was a cut that was made before, and you can see that the tree is now starting to seal that off. We call that compartmentalization in trees. And it's a way that the tree protects itself. When we get cut, we're open to infection and other things, but our body actually like seals that off and heals it on over. We actually replace that tissue and we heal. Trees don't do that. When you make a cut and you see this right in here, they don't get infection, they get called decay. And that decay starts spreading down through the branches. Now, if they can stop this by sealing that off, that stops the spread of that decay in there. So making a proper cut is very important. When a stub is left like this stub right here, now the spread of that decay keeps going until that tree grows out far enough that it can grow over that. This is a perfect cut because you're getting a complete seal around there all the way around here. Here's another one that's completely almost sealed off. And here's one that's completely sealed off. And you can see how that's a perfect uniform of gone in there. Those were some proper cuts in trees. This one right here, a pistache tree in here that's an ornamental tree. And when we go through there, we take a lot of the inside, branches on in there, the suckers and things like that, some of the growth that might be blocking and dead wood. It's completely different as we talk about fruit trees. So we'll go talk about some fruit trees. Here's some right over here. This is probably the desert fruit tree out here. This is a pomegranate. And what's great about pomegranates is they really don't need anything. You can let pomegranates just keep growing and going and not have to worry much about pruning them. If they're getting too high, where these are kind of getting a little bit high where they're harder to pick, you can cut them way back to a size that you can reach. If you do that though, you're cutting off a lot of that new growth that is coming out in the pomegranates, and you won't have as good a crop until about a year or two later. So just know if you get aggressive with them, these have been pruned up more to an ornamental type look. They've taken all the lower growth. They're very hard to control that way because they keep suckering on up. All right, here we have a pecan tree. A lot of pecans here in St. George. Some people don't like the pecan trees because they're constantly dripping from aphids. Aphids eat on the pecan trees, and aphids secrete what's called honeydew. And I like to think of it as natural rhino lining for your car. It gets that sticky mess on there. But if you park under a pecan tree in St. George, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about in there. But pecan trees, as far as pruning and taking care of them, the best thing to do, just like we talked about on our last trees, even if you make proper cuts, they're terrible at compartmentalizing. So the best is not to do anything with pecans that you don't have to. Now, if they're hanging on the house, they're hanging down in the way, we try to think we want to take as least as possible on there, because as you make that cut, no matter how good of a cut you make, that decay starts to spread back, and then that whole branch can die and fall and break off. So pecan trees are very weak trees. So the best to remember on those is just leave them alone and let them grow. That's how they're going to be the strongest. Next thing we're talking about is grapes. Most people butcher their grapes. They take way too much. What you want to do is find one vine that's going, and you put it on your wire, and you let that go down the wire. Then everything else gets pruned back to 3 buds. So I count up 1, 2, 3, and I make my cut. 1, 2, 3, and make my cut. That's about all you do with grapes. Okay, let's talk about some fruit trees here. The main thing about fruit trees is there's 3 different ways that you can prune, mainly here in St. George, on your fruit trees. One is called central leader, where we leave a leader that comes right on up through the center of the tree, and then you prune everything around that central leader. And you have one branch that's right up through the middle. Then we have a modified central leader, where we might have 3 or 4 of those branches coming on up, and you prune all the other branches below that a little bit lower. Then you have what's called open center, where we completely take out the center of all the branches in the center, and we open it up to 4 main leaders. This one right here is kind of all of these in here are mainly either a modified or a central leader. So here we have one. This is an almond tree, and it's growing right on up through the center. It's modified. You have 3 or 4 branches on in here. Here's another one that at one time probably was open center, and what we'd want to do to open the center is this whole branch right here would come out, and we take this whole branch out, and maybe a few more that open up and spread open. And the reason you want to do that is so the sun hits as many blossoms as possible, and then you're going to get more fruit in there. On an open center, you pick 4 or 5 main branches, 1, 2, 3, 4, and spreading those all out through the tree. Over at the Washington County office, they have a great book there, and it talks about fruit tree pruning. The people are always asking me, hey, what are the best fruit trees out there to plant? Ones with the least amount of disease and problems. So your number one here, we talked a little bit about the pomegranate. That's about the easiest one, very drought tolerant, and there's really hardly any diseases or insect problems. The next ones are apricots and peaches. They do very well. Cherries do very well here. So those are the 3 top ones. You know, people are asking me, well, what about apples? We have a real problem with an insect called codling moth. And unless you're going to take care of your fruit tree and spray it every week with malathion or 7, and keep spraying to keep the coddling moth down, you're just not going to have good apples. Plums stop producing sugars at about 90 to 95 degrees. We get really hot here in St. George, so therefore the plums never mature to where they can be very good plum trees here in St. George. Almonds do really well here, and pecans do very well, and also pistachio. So those are the three main ones on your nut and fruit trees. One of the main problems we have with fruit and nut trees is borers. Borers are like tree termites. They eat inside the tree and they just devastate it. So here you can see that we have some borers and they eat on the inside of the tree, and eventually they kill our trees. The best way to control those is what we call a dormant oil spray, which is best done about 2 to 3 weeks before bud break. And there's all sorts of Vox oil, dormant oil, supreme oil. There are all these types, and they stay a lot. There's a lot of arguments of whether that is on the organic list or not. It's not something that's getting onto the fruit, and it's a very low on the LD50 as far as being toxic. Now, if you're okay with having a few things of some chemicals and using those, adding a little malathion or 7 to that dormant oil spray in there also gives that much more control of these insects and causing those. Now, trees can live a long time with this type of problem, keeping the tree healthy. You can prune these branches out. It's okay for fruit production if your tree looks a little bit funny. As long as it's still producing, you might as well keep it. Once it's completely dead and died out, you can start back over with a new tree.